Hello and welcome to another in a series of conversations with candidates for Santa Cruz City Council. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. Thanks for joining me tonight. And with me in the studio is Robert Singleton.
Hello.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So Robert, as I've asked everyone, what's driving you to want to run for City Council? What is it in your background that made you jump over the line and make that decision to run?
Okay. Well, I've always been really interested in politics. And so I've been here in Santa Cruz for about 9 years now, and I've always tried to be as civically engaged as possible. In fact, the company that I started here while I was a junior at UCSC is Civinomics, which is all about using technology to get more people involved in the civic process, hopefully with better information via use of digital technology and the internet and smartphones, etc.
So is that business still going?
Yes, it is. We've just transitioned a lot to focus more on the development of kind of the back-end software versus our former stance was to be kind of proactive and kind of cover issues in a weekly blog and allow people to vote on those issues and then present the results to council. Now, I mean, we still would like to do that, but it's very labor intensive. Yeah. And so we're trying to focus on creating more of a scalable software product that can work, kind of automating the process by which people can interact with their city council. And so we're currently working on a product build for the city of Austin, Texas.
So you obviously are really interested in civic participation, and that's something that drives you. It seems like not that many young people are interested in, the process of going and talking to your elected officials and stating what you want and learning about policy. How did you get interested? Did you get interested at UC Santa Cruz in all this?
I actually became really involved in local government back in my hometown too when I was in high school. My first job was as a street canvasser for a local nonprofit organization, and we went door to door throughout the entire county, around 70,000 doors a year, over Sonoma County, which is around 660,000 people.
Wow, you must have seen a lot of doors slammed.
I've seen a lot of dogs, I've seen a lot of gates, I've seen a lot of everything. So, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I don't think I was alone. Most of the people that worked for us were kind of young and idealistic and passionate. And when you go off to college and you go and you learn about larger theories, I did international relations, down to really hard political theory like Kant and like Marx, and it's easy to kind of to forget about the small little battles that are taking place in every single community and the kind of the issues that are being discussed. And so it's always been intriguing to me. It's never boring. So I find it really challenging and just something that's fun to do and be passionate about, I guess.
So UC Santa Cruz might be an area you would be campaigning. What do you say to UC Santa Cruz students who are, used to be a really big voting bloc, or a little bit less so now because people seem to vote, if at all, still in their hometowns. How do you talk to them about the importance of city council politics and policy?
Well, the way I kind of, right now, what's on everyone's mind right now is the national election between, Hillary and Donald. And it's really easy to get cynical about that. So I find that most people are probably just trying to tune out politics in general. And so when you approach them, you want to talk about things that are more relatable, like the quality of your local roads, like whether or not you can catch a bus on time. I mean, where are your student fees going? I mean, are you able to afford your rent on a monthly basis? And so I think because these issues are so at the forefront of what these students are dealing with for the first time, because many of them are just transitioning out of their parents' household and becoming independent, these issues start to matter a lot more than they used to. And so if you can talk to them on the practical level and say that, regardless of who gets elected in the presidential race, which will have very serious implications for a lot of things, still, in terms of your daily life, the things that matter to you are much more within reach to members of the city council and board of supervisors than they are to, say, your member of Congress or the president.
Right. So some of those issues might be housing, and I don't want to get lost in that discussion just yet because I'm still really interested in what you have to say about young people in politics. Did it give you pause to see that many people coming out for a Bernie Sanders rally in Santa Cruz?
No,
Were you surprised?
I wouldn't say I'm surprised. I mean, I'm happy it happened that way. But I think, I actually think, which actually telling more of the cynicism of the times is that it's really easy to get hopeful when you hear something that resonates. And so when you hear someone like Bernie talking about, hey, we need to make it easier for students to be able to go to school and be able to pay for that school. We need to have greater access to health care. Income inequality is distorting economic outcomes in our country and making it really hard for young folks and old folks alike and everyone in between. That message resonates. And so I think it's just a willingness for someone to be kind of a leader and a thought leader on those issues and talk about it. And I think it inspired me. I mean, I voted for Bernie. And so I think I touched the mic there, but I think you know, it didn't surprise me that people were inspired. I think it was just the right outlet at the right time.
Right. And so your challenge in a way is to get them continuing to be interested, even if their candidate didn't win, that local politics still matters.
Definitely.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of those issues that might concern everyone, not just students. Housing is a big one. We've talked about that with other candidates. There's so many subcategories under that, but I'm sure a lot of people, it's just affordable housing in general, and rents have gone way up. So that affects the quality of life, the ability to live here, period. And when people have kids, you know, who want to stay here, the second generation can't. So what are some policy things that City Council should do, can do, maybe that you would want to work on that isn't being done, that you would like to see the focus become?
So I think, you know, when you look at the housing crunch, and really we're reeling from kind of the larger housing crunch that's affecting almost all of coastal California, and especially the Southern California metro areas and in the Bay Area in particular, because especially in the Bay Area, you've seen a boom in jobs and a boom of people wanting to migrate here and to start companies here and to work here and stay here, for a lot of really good reasons, I think. But we really haven't invested in the kind of supply that we need behind this economic backbone. And I think Santa Cruz is experiencing part of that, and it's really kind of a perfect storm in Santa Cruz, because we don't have the wages or the jobs that Silicon Valley does, or like San Francisco does. We have a large university that's constantly bringing in new people here and additional new students now, and it's putting a lot of pressure. And you live in a coastal area which has a lot of tourism and a lot of pressure for that transition for units for vacation rentals. And so, you know, all of these things kind of create the perfect storm for Santa Cruz. But I think honestly the best way to move forward is to try and make it easier to develop new housing. We have to develop new housing because Santa Cruz is growing. It's going to continue to grow with young people coming here and with the pressures from Silicon Valley. But it's a matter of, are we willing to take a proactive approach to kind of preserve the diversity that we have, the eclectic diversity that we really appreciate in terms of the culture of Santa Cruz. And I think to do that, you need to provide a wide array of housing units. So right now we have a community that's 60% renters, and we have 80% of our housing stock is single-family homes. That's a fundamental imbalance in terms of where these folks want to live, and an efficient use of resources too. Because I think you'll find that most students, as well as most younger professionals, would prefer to live in denser communities where we have shared living spaces. One, because it's inherently cheaper, but two, we're social. We like to go hang out with each other. We like to be near amenities where we can walk, where we can bike. And I think you'll find that a lot of seniors as well, who no longer want to live in a single-family home where they are themselves the only person there. And it's, you know, so having them live in communities as well and being able to, again, walk to the grocery store and things like that, I think it makes a lot of sense. So in terms of the fundamental question now is not about, you know, what to do. I think we need to build more housing. It's about where.
Yeah, and where would you build big apartment complexes, for example, which sounds like what you were, maybe that's just
it's
too
a relative
simplistic.
size too. You
Right.
got to understand what's big for Santa Cruz is not nearly big for anywhere that we're talking and leaning on urban models. What I would say is that in the downtown area, we have a potential opportunity for growth. And you know, when the downtown recovery plan was just being amended most recently, we are calling for buildings that are at par with the current tallest building in the city's downtown corridor. And that's only for one street on Lower Pacific Avenue. And so we're not building any taller than what we already have, but we're just building more infill. And what's great about this is, these units will be smaller, they will be denser, and it will be a more efficient use of resources. It will be built near transportation, but I think that it will provide a greater vibrancy to the downtown area, and especially in the Lower Pacific Avenue area, where we kind of don't have the kind of robust restaurants and kind of destination spots that we have in other parts of the mall.
I've always found it interesting as a gradient from, you know, the clock tower to the big destination for a lot of people, the boardwalk. There's this gap where it feels a bit sketchy, and there's big holes still. So I think that's what you're talking about, is the part of, you know, north of Laurel or west of Laurel, wherever that is.
But also that part, right, where there's a project that's looking right towards the end of downtown, near where the Taco Bell is in that back parking lot, as well as some of the kind of larger retail space there. And they're kind of looking, I think they're still going to have ground floor retail there, but the idea is to build housing on top of that, and denser housing again. And I think there's definitely a market for that.
What's interesting is after the earthquake, and I just interviewed someone who was talking about noise ordinance and how it used to be able to have more rock bands downtown. But I thought it's probably because people live above those spaces now. So you're having lots of mixed use, as a planner, it sounds good, but then there's this moment where everything's clashing. You know?
Yeah, you know, you may get some of that. I mean, you do have the Catalyst down there. It's already been down there for a while, and you do have a lot of units in and around. I'm actually probably more worried about the back of the Catalyst than the front in terms of kind of the noise. But I think there's ways in which you can mitigate noise, and there's smart design that takes into account things. And also, you know, we're not going to put like the noisiest concert hall in the world right under a bunch of mixed-use housing. That's why the Catalyst is its own building, and it's in between two other clubs and retail spots as well. So, I mean, there's ways I think you can take that into account to where you can make it so it's not going to be a tremendous deal.
So it's surprising how quickly the arena went in and maybe didn't become this giant problem, maybe for the immediate people. What about a permanent arena? Is that something you're in favor of?
Definitely. I think, you know, there was a lot of healthy skepticism when the Warriors kind of were taking interest in Santa Cruz. But I think if you've been to their games, I think if you've seen some of the work that they're doing in the community and you've kind of taken part in that, and I think it's a tremendous asset for the community. Not only is it something that kind of adds to the kind of a vibrancy and the identity of Santa Cruz, and you're having a sports team, something to kind of take pride in and follow, and I go to the games regularly, but it's also an anchor establishment in the off season in the downtown area that draws in primarily locals from other parts of the county to come and take part in the downtown, to eat dinner down there, to do some you know, other shopping that they might not normally have done. And I think they've been able to manage kind of the impact of the Warrior Arena very well. And you know, I live right above it on Beach Hill, and frankly, it's never really been a problem.
Yeah, easier for you to get to games too.
Yeah.
And there's been attempts to regulate vacation rentals. We mentioned them briefly, but there's the Airbnb effect that a lot of communities are struggling with, the daily rentals, you know, people trying to make maximum dollar on one room, for example, which throws them off the rental market. Is there anything local cities can do you think, to try to mitigate? Is there a planning mechanism they could use to try to mitigate both that and renting out whole houses? I mean, you said before that that's a natural thing for a beachside community to have, is vacation rentals. But if that's all you have, then you don't have a regular, long-standing community living there and staffing things.
Totally.
So how do you strike that balance?
Well, I think you know, I think the key word you mentioned is balance. You know, we have an economy that's primarily based off tourism. So, you know, and there's a long tradition of a lot of these units being used full-time as vacation rentals for generations now. So we need to be able to take that perspective into account. But yes, we need to recognize what kind of impact it's having on our housing market and how severe that's going to be in terms of how we assess, you know, we're definitely going to regulate it in some fashion. It's just a matter of where we decide to draw that line. I think one of the things we need to be very conscious of when moving forward that I think is kind of personal is the difference between renting out an entire house versus renting out a room in your house and having it be owner occupied. I think there's something very, very appealing about the idea of home sharing, both from the flexibility of someone who lives in an area and would like to have multiple uses for their own home. You know, hosting a European family for 2 days or, you know, something like that, I think is a lot different than renting out a large house where you're going to have 10 plus people come by there and it's primarily going to be used as like a celebration place. So moving forward, I just want to say that any approach in terms of regulating vacation rentals should attempt to understand the difference between those two. Because I think when I've been and staying at Airbnbs or hosted people at an Airbnb, and we did it briefly for a summer season, you know, it was a really positive experience. And it's an experience that's very different from that of staying in a hotel.
A lot more personal. You get to know the hosts and so forth.
You get to feel kind of like a local in a new neighborhood.
So let's talk about economics in general. That's kind of a big topic, and the city council policy can only impact it so much. They could pass a minimum wage. They could do other things to try to support housing for certain occupations. What are some ideas, given that there are some statistics that say a lot of the new jobs being created are, you know, $12 an hour health home aid, that's the biggest growing industry. So we have a lot of $12 an hour workers. What does a city council do policy-wise about kind of wages and other floors they might be able to set or support for working class people working minimum wage? There's a lot of restaurant jobs here that make it really difficult to live here for a lot of people, especially the working poor. So what do we do about, you know, working poor, that they are still on food stamps and other aid even though they're working couple jobs? And a lot of these are students I see at Cabrillo, so I ask that sort of from a personal,
totally.
They are having a tough time.
Yeah, well, I think, and this is an effort I've been focusing a lot more on recently. I think, when you talk to local businesses, and I work as a policy analyst at the Santa Cruz County Business Council, which is kind of like the 70 of mid to larger range companies in the county. And what we find is that it's really easy to get a lot of entry-level folks who are coming in with very little experience and get a lot of them. And we have a lot of upper C-level, upper-level managers who have been doing this for a long time, who have a lot of experience and who most of the time work over the hill or are very competitive and can get a job on a lot of different areas. But what we're really missing is kind of that middle manager gap. And I think that's partially to do with a lot of those folks trying to find greener pastures elsewhere. So there's some who will stick around who will work the $12 an hour jobs, who will try and make it work or do multiple of them. I know a bunch of people. I myself have had multiple jobs many times, and so you'll try and juggle these things to make it work because you care about the community so much. But for a lot of folks, they lose interest with this kind of ongoing stress, and it's caused by both the lack of opportunity and then not having the available housing that could support them. And so I think there's a couple things you can do. One is you definitely want to incentivize or you want to better pair local businesses with kind of the community college career tracks that are coming out from Cabrillo. This is one thing that I think if you talk to both the companies and the institutions alike, you'll find that if there was a greater kind of workforce needs assessment that would to better define the career tracks from those who are graduating community college to kind of place them into local positions. One of the things that we did do, because the workforce needs assessment itself is a very large task that has to be done and be very thorough. So what we did in the meantime is we created actually mbinterns.org. This is something I worked on as the project manager for the Business Council. And what this is it's an internship posting board for local companies geared directly towards our college students at both UCSC and Cabrillo initially, and it's since expanded now to the entire Monterey Bay and is now working with CSUMB, UCSC, Monterey Peninsula College, and Cabrillo, trying to get these students better paired with these local companies. And we find that once the companies themselves kind of bring the student on and get them some applied knowledge, they're willing to then make the investment to kind of bring them up to a larger level and make better use of their skill set. But kind of creating that initial relationship or that initial pathway is really important, because a lot of these folks, if they don't build those relationships, they don't know that these companies are out here, and they'll probably go to greener pastures because, again, the housing is so expensive already that it's a big deterrent.
Well, I'll have to tell my students about it. I'm not sure they all know, and I work at Cabrillo, so that's great to know. Thanks for the information about that. And it does seem like, you don't have to have a 4-year degree to get up there, but it's hard to make that stair step unless you have an internship or some other way in.
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked about housing and the next sort of step when you don't have any and you really are not even getting that $12 an hour, or maybe you do, but you cannot afford a place to live, is the large homeless population. And 84% of the homeless in Santa Cruz were from here before becoming homeless. So that says a lot. That's a pretty high percentage.
What was where is that from, ASR?
That is from the community assessment, the county.
From United Way?
Mm-hmm,
Okay.
yeah.
Because there's like 3 different surveys and they all use different metrics.
Okay,
so,
well.
in different jurisdictions. So the ASR survey is a county-wide survey. United Way is a community assessment survey. And I'm not sure.
Are they all that far off though from that? Because the general impression I've gotten from
I would
most
say a
people who
majority-
study homelessness
So
is
it depends on how you ask the question, because it's like, were you homeless or were you living in Santa Cruz before you became homeless versus is this your hometown or were you raised here? I mean, there's different ways of asking the question. So I think in the way that they're using, I'm pretty sure the question is for both the ASR and the United Way survey is, were you living in Santa Cruz when you became homeless?
So it sounds like you have a little bit of curiosity about those numbers because maybe people are coming here and to be homeless. Is that what's underneath that? I mean, I've heard that myth, but I don't know if the numbers bear that out.
I think you do have some folks that do tend to migrate to different places, and we have documented folks that do spend a lot of time traveling up and down coastal California, but that's not a uniquely Santa Cruz thing. And when we've done, I helped lead a survey with UCSC. The community studies, psychology, and sociology departments kind of collaborated to create this questionnaire, and then we helped implement it and go do surveys of folks who self-identified as homeless. And we found that a lot of them who weren't originally from here, the question we asked was, is Santa Cruz your hometown? Which is going to get a very different response than were you homeless when you, or were you living in Santa Cruz when you became homeless?
Regardless of where they lived before they became homeless, though, it becomes the city's problem,
Totally.
regardless of where they came from. That might help some people think they don't have responsibility because they moved here recently, became homeless. But that set aside, what does the city council, what could they do and what aren't they doing maybe to address this in a more creative and proactive way that has better results? Because it seems like the numbers have stayed fairly steady for a while.
Yeah, according to the ASR numbers, they were down this past year, but again, that depends on the methodology. And this year, they weren't utilizing the police department to help them kind of go into encampments more so. I would say that we have what we need to understand about anything that in terms of addressing homelessness is that the community itself is extremely diverse. There's not one all-catch-all policy that's going to work for all folks who are homeless. And homeless is really just a state. You know, it could be a temporary state, but so not having a home is very different than kind of antisocial behavior, which is a lot people sometimes associate, which I want to discourage because, you know, I don't think just because you're homeless you're any more likely to commit a crime.
No, inversely. In fact, you're more likely to be the victim of a crime because you have nowhere to protect your belongings. So.
Exactly. And I think so we need to recognize, so I think there's a portfolio of policies used to address specific populations within the homeless community. You have those who have been chronically homeless, who are homeless for more than 5 years. I think there's really only one policy approach that's been proven to be somewhat effective in helping these folks out while also reducing costs, and that's permanent supportive housing. And so I'm a strong supporter of housing first for those who are chronically homeless and have been so for 5 more years and are very vulnerable. Getting someone a roof over their head and providing access to services where you can have someone understand if they qualify for state disability, if there's Social Security support available to them, other things are, you know, what kind of Medicaid options are available to them. That's the first step towards getting that person back on their feet and perhaps eventually getting back into the workforce. In terms of other groups, you know, we've got a big problem with untreated mental illness, and we don't have a lot of services available. Both at the federal, state, or even local level. You know, we've got a day center right now with MHCAN, which is a mental health care client action network. I believe it's what that acronym stands for.
That's right.
Which I think offers a great space for peer-to-peer services where folks can kind of, you know, again, I've been to MHCAN. They serve meals there. They've got some entertainment there. I mean, they even have like acupuncture. I think they were doing, and so that's a kind of a good day center approach. But you know, when the center closes, all those folks are then out at night, and so you need to have a place for them to go. So you need to have some kind of overnight facility for people with untreated mental illness, because you know it's just going to create a negative or a downward spiral, which you know it doesn't help anyone. And then there's also the issues of substance abuse, which are really hard because you'll find that a lot of our petty theft and our property crime is a result of substance abuse, and so that requires its own set of services because you know. To try and break the cycle, you've got to take someone away from not only the peers that are helping to enable and encourage this kind of behavior, but you need to kind of break. It's not easy, and sometimes you can't go cold turkey for medical reasons. So there are ways in which you have to treat specific substance abuse problems that are much different. So I think recognizing the inherent diversity when having a policy approach to homelessness is really important. So
Robert, we've come to the last 5 minutes. It goes fast, I know. So I want to hit on a couple other issues that we haven't talked about that maybe all of them are related because they're all sharing the city together. We've done a pretty good job with the environment. We've got a bag ban. We've got, you know, clean up the river. We have Save Our Shores helping do volunteer efforts. Sometimes it still feels like we're not getting a handle on protecting the river properly. And there have been some proposals to have everybody use it more, that it will protect it if we use it, because then they'll care about it. Where do you fall on the river? Because, you know, there are towns that the river is the focal point, certainly not ours, but is too much attention a bad thing? What do you feel could be done that might, you know, in a minute or two? In a minute. So, I mean, again, it's a healthy balance. I think that we are underutilizing our river, both as a natural estuary, but also as, you know, an active modal place for transportation and an active recreation. I myself am also a birder, so I understand there's a lot of sensitive bird habitats in the river, and you know, that's why we're not going to have outward-facing lights directly onto the river, and I would be very against that if that were to happen. But there are practical things that we can do, whether it's you know, again, river lights that face away to help people feel more safe using the river at night. I think there are things where, you know, opening up parts of the river to commercial access, to where you could walk directly from the river walk
onto, say, to a cafe or a beer garden or something, especially on the back and the front right now, because right now the way the levee works, it just kind of sinks in, and there's a bunch of space which has not been utilized for the best uses in our community thus far. And so I think in some of those uses can have severe impacts on the natural environment, whether just lots of litter and other kinds of things, defecation. We've had a lot of issues around there. Hopefully the public bathrooms will help out with that. But I think having more eyes on the prize, having more people utilize the Riverwalk, again, will create a better relationship between the city residents and the kind of underutilized space. Obviously, again, there's a balance, but right now what's going on or what has been going on in the levee hasn't been the best use of it from an environmental stewardship perspective either. So.
Okay, thanks. So water issues, in the 3 minutes we have left, what are some things you would do if the drought kind of comes back again? And we were on water restrictions.
Well, I'm very supportive of what the Water Supply Advisory Committee came up with as a recommendation. And it's a package of recommendations that were approved on consensus by the whole committee. And I think that speaks volumes to the practical nature of it. Because these folks, these 14 poor souls, spent 18 months spending hours and hours, 10 hours.
Better listen to them.
Yeah, studying the river, working with city staff, and you represent business interests, environmental interests, and the at-large representatives all came together to kind of look at this issue. And what they did is they kind of said, okay, during the worst multi-seasonal droughts that we're going to have a shortfall of around 1 billion gallons that we're going to need to deal with for that particular year of usage. And so, given that, what's the most effective way to kind of deal with that potential shortfall? Utilizing existing resources, taking into account, cost mitigation, taking into account, energy use and energy consumption, taking into account where we put it and how we finance it. I mean, there's all these things are taken into account, and I think their compromise was really pragmatic because it prioritizes the potentially cheaper, more sustainable ways of doing things, which are in lieu recharge, which is during the winter months when we have lots of rain and lots of surface water, we can actually tell SoCal that they don't have to pump their water anymore and they can take some water from us. And then aquifer storage and recharge, which is where we're actively pushing water into their aquifers using that same excess winter flow.
Well, that's a lot to say in a short amount of time, but it's a great report, and it sounds like you support it.
Yes.
So in the minute we have left, thanks so much for being here, by the way. What are some last thoughts you'd like to leave us with about why you would make a great city council candidate and what your vision for the future is?
Yeah, well, in terms of why I think I'd make a great candidate or a great council member would be just my willingness to be pragmatic, my willingness to be open-minded, to always consider new ideas, to always dive really deep down into the details, but also have a great relationship with my fellow council members. And I think in terms of the core approach to Santa Cruz and kind of the vision.
Sounds like you have a lot of ideas, and
I do. Please check out my website, singletonforsantacruz.com.
There you go, and thanks for spending half hour with us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. Thank you for watching.